As a janitor at the local high school, I'm used to working the night shift. But tonight is different. I can feel it in my bones. I've been working at this school for a few months now. It's always been a little creepy with its long, empty corridors and dark classrooms. But I need the money, so I try to ignore the feeling of unease that always seems to linger here. But tonight, that unease is stronger than ever. I can hear strange noises coming from the empty rooms and hallways. At first, I try to tell myself that it's just the old building settling, but the sounds are too eerie to be natural. As I make my rounds, I can feel something watching me. I turn around, but there's never anyone there. It's like I'm being stalked by an unseen presence. I try to shake off the feeling and focus on my work, but it's hard to concentrate. I'm jumpy and on edge, constantly glancing over my shoulder. Eventually, I can't take it anymore. I grab my flashlight and decide to investigate the source of the strange noises. As I move deeper into the school, the feeling of being watched intensifies. I reach the old, abandoned wing of the school. The door to the wing is slightly ajar, and the noises are coming from inside. I push the door open and shine my flashlight inside. To my horror, I see a figure hanging from the ceiling. It's one of the teachers, and she's dead. I scream and stumble backwards, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the floor. Without thinking, I bolt out of the room and run outside. I fumble with my phone, trying to dial 911. My hands are shaking and I can barely see through my tears. Finally, I get through to the operator and explain what I've seen. They tell me to stay calm and that help is on the way. I can hear sirens in the distance, getting closer and closer. I wait outside the school, pacing back and forth. The police arrive and I show them where the teacher is. They rush inside and I hear more sirens as more emergency vehicles arrive. I'm in shock, barely able to process what's happening. The police ask me a million questions, but I can barely answer them. I'm just grateful to be out of that creepy old school. The next day, I receive a phone call from the school. They tell me that the teacher who hanged herself in the abandoned wing was one of the most popular and well-loved teachers at the school. She had no known problems or issues, and her death was a complete shock to everyone. I decide to quit my job at the school, unable to shake the feeling of unease that has settled over me. I know I'll never forget the night shift horror at the old, abandoned wing of the high school. And I'll never go back there again. It wasn't my first night shift as a police officer, but it was the first time I had been sent to an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I had heard all the stories about strange and terrifying things that can happen during the night, but I was determined to stay calm and professional. As I approached the warehouse, I could see that the windows were boarded up and the doors were locked. I used my crowbar to pry open the doors and shine my flashlight inside. The warehouse was filled with old crates and boxes, and it was clear that no one had been there in a long time. But as I continued to search, I heard a faint noise coming from one of the back rooms. I cautiously approached the room, my heart pounding in my chest. When I pushed open the door, I was greeted by a sight that will haunt me for the rest of my life. As I entered the room, I could see that the group of people were chanting and performing some kind of dark ritual. They were standing around a large altar, upon which was a human-like figure. I couldn't tell if it was a real person or a dummy, but I could see blood smeared on the altar and on the robes of the people standing around it. I was frozen in shock and fear, unsure of what to do. I wanted to call for backup, but I was afraid that the noise would alert the people to my presence. So I stood there, watching in horror as they continued their ritual. Suddenly, one of the masked figures turned and noticed me. With a fierce snarl, they lunged at me, brandishing a knife. I managed to dodge and run back out of the warehouse, calling for backup as I went. But when they arrived, the masked figures were gone. The warehouse was empty, as if they had vanished into thin air. I searched the area for any sign of them, but it was like they had disappeared completely. To this day, I still don't know who they were or what they were doing in that abandoned warehouse. The memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine, and I can't help but wonder if they are still out there, waiting for their next victim. It was a typical night shift at the old, abandoned factory. I was the only security guard on duty, and I had to admit, the place gave me the creeps. The creaking of the old machinery and the eerie silence that filled the empty halls made my skin crawl. As I patrolled the premises, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the feeling only grew stronger. I eventually made my way to the main control room, where I found the power had been cut off. I fumbled around in the dark, trying to find the backup generator switch. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding in my chest as I continued to search for the switch. The voice continued to taunt me, saying things like, "You're going to die tonight, and you're all alone." I finally found the switch and turned on the backup generator, but the lights only flickered on for a moment before going out again. I was trapped in the darkness, with the malevolent voice tormenting me. I tried to find my way out of the factory, but it seemed like the layout had changed. Every turn I took led me to a dead end or a locked door. As I wandered aimlessly, the voice grew louder and more insistent. It was as if it was coming from all around me, surrounding me. I finally stumbled upon a door that led to the outside. I burst through it and ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the safety of my car. As I drove away from the factory, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I looked in my rearview mirror, I thought I saw a shadowy figure lurking behind me. I knew it was just my imagination, but the fear continued to grip me. I eventually made it back to the safety of my home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something evil was still lurking in the shadows. I locked all the doors and windows and tried to put the night shift out of my mind. But the next night, when I returned to work, the same thing happened. The power went out and the malevolent voice returned, taunting me and driving me to the brink of madness. I knew I couldn't continue to work at the factory, but I couldn't quit either. I needed the job to pay my bills. So I continued to suffer through the night shifts, always on edge and always terrified. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped and ran out of the factory, leaving everything behind. I never looked back, and I never forgot the true horror of the night shift. As I walked onto the night shift, I could feel a sense of unease wash over me. The hospital was quiet, save for the beeping of machines and the occasional sound of a nurse's footsteps. I made my way to the nurse's station, where I was greeted by my colleague, Lisa. She handed me a clipboard with my patient list and gave me a quick rundown of their conditions. As the night wore on, I felt a growing sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hospital seemed to be alive, as if it were breathing and watching me. I checked on my patients, making sure they were comfortable and their vital signs were stable. But as I entered one of the rooms, I was greeted by a chilling sight. The patient, who had been stable just moments before, was now lying on the bed with their eyes wide open and a look of pure terror on their face. I quickly called for backup and tried to resuscitate the patient, but it was too late. They were gone. As I stood there, trying to process what had just happened, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "You're next." I turned around, but there was no one there. I quickly made my way to the nurse's station, where Lisa was waiting for me. She looked at me with concern and asked if I was okay. I shook my head, unable to form words. I knew that the night shift was going to be a long and terrifying one. As the night went on, more strange and terrifying events occurred. The hospital seemed to be alive, with doors opening and closing on their own and eerie whispers filling the air. One of my patients, who had been in a coma for weeks, suddenly sat up in bed and began speaking in a language that I didn't understand. I tried to calm them down, but they only grew more agitated and violent. I called for backup and we managed to sedate the patient, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned a corner or entered a room, I felt a presence behind me. I tried to focus on my patients and do my job, but the fear was overwhelming. I knew that I had to make it through the night shift and get out of the hospital as soon as possible. But as the hours ticked by, the hospital grew more and more malevolent. I could feel its dark energy seeping into my bones, making it harder and harder to resist its evil influence. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted and terrified. I had survived the night shift, but at what cost? The hospital had left its mark on me, and I knew that I would never be the same again. I was working the night shift at the local convenience store when things started to get strange. It was a quiet night, and I was the only one working. I was stocking shelves and trying to stay awake when I heard a knock on the front door. It was after hours, so I assumed it was just someone trying to get my attention. I walked over to the door and peered through the glass, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off and went back to work, but then I heard the knocking again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from the back of the store. I cautiously made my way to the back, but again, there was no one there. I started to feel a sense of unease wash over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I was making my way back to the front of the store, I heard a voice behind me. I turned around and saw a homeless man standing there. He had a crazed look in his eyes and he was muttering something under his breath. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been in love with you since you started working here," the man said, his voice low and menacing. "I've been watching you, waiting for the right moment to tell you how I feel." I was terrified, and I knew I had to get out of there. I ran to the front of the store and locked the door, but I could hear the man pounding on it, trying to get in. I quickly grabbed the phone and dialed 911, telling them what was happening. The police arrived soon after and arrested the homeless man. They searched the store and found him hiding in the back, but thankfully, he didn't cause any more trouble. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of terror that had gripped me. I was grateful to be safe, but I knew I would never forget the fear I felt that night. I never worked the night shift again.